It was a morning like many others in the village of Igna, on the outskirts of Hebron. Just 3 years prior, the Israeli army swiftly conquered the area. A man carefully began his work as the tractor's engine roared to life. The rich ground was being beaten by the plow. The blade easily broke up the soil, but after a while, the engine's noise was drowned out by a strange grind sound. The plow had struck something. Was it a stone, perhaps? The farmer went to investigate. There was something incredibly strange in the dirt. A stone mask sporting an enigmatic smile. This morning certainly wasn't like many others. Like any serious mystery story, what happened next is not entirely clear. But for sure, the stone mask ended up in the hands of an antiquity dealer. Many other similar masks had been discovered before, but none of them had been thoroughly studied by archaeologists. Some thought they were forgeries, intended to be sold to gullible Western travelers. But someone else had crossed the shop's threshold, and it was impossible not to recognize him at first glance. The patch on his eye made him look like a pirate, and this made him a global icon. The man on the doorstep was the Israeli Defense Minister, General Moshe Dayan. This is the story of the Neolithic desert masks, and of how in archaeology, only context matters. Welcome to the Mists of Time. General Dayan was an amateur archaeologist. Some of his antiquity purchases are controversial at best, but it's a story for another time. Let's keep our focus on the Neolithic mask. The general bought it right away and took it home, where he already had a sizable collection of antiquities. He contacted a French archaeologist to get his opinion. The expert determined that it was made around 9,000 years ago, during the Neolithic period. The mask wasn't the first one to be dug. However, it was unclear exactly where the others came from. But things were different this time. Finally, it was possible to look into where one of the masks came from. The Israeli Antiquities Authority dispatched a team immediately, but a thorough investigation of the field produced no new information. You know, in archaeology, a discovery's location is not everything. The context is what counts most. I'm aware that the concept of archaeological context sounds like a strange academic idea, so I would like to provide an illustration that is more relatable. Assume we were archaeologists in the future. We've left our space colony to investigate an ancient landfill on our planet. Our goal is to understand how life was in the past. Inside landfills, there are a staggering number of well-preserved items from daily life. However, one kind of artifact is confusing archaeologists. Several plastic pine trees in various sizes. At one point, a professor made the following hypothesis. We know from the ice in Antarctica that the ancient world civilization struggled with climate change. So perhaps people planted these trees to ask the gods to save the dying forests? Academics are not persuaded by this hypothesis. And to discuss this issue, papers are written and videos posted online. Then came a day. A surprising discovery is made. A 1950s-era home that was suddenly buried by mud flow. The soil was in extremely unusual condition, and a significant amount of the organic material has been preserved. The unfortunate victims were dressed in what we understand to be formal attire, which was reserved for special occasions. We assume that the accident occurred during winter because of their warm clothing. We can still find traces of their fine dinner. It was evidently an important day. Then something is discovered in a corner of the main room. The first fake pine tree in its original context, with its decorations still intact. A new interpretation has now gained traction. This tree was a ritual object used for a winter festivity. Okay, I know this example was a little over the top. But seriously, archaeologists can understand incredible things based on the context of a finding. They can see details that you would never imagine. They can, for example, precisely date an object from a nearby charcoal remains, or from a tiny fragment of pottery. So let's go back to our masks. Many have been discovered in the past, but only one's origin location has been investigated. What could archaeologists learn from the few pieces of evidence they had? The size, weight and placement of the eye sockets indicate that the masks were worn by someone. Two of the examples have small holes for straps too. However, very few speculations could be made about them. Years passed and new research methods emerged. The patina on each mask was carefully examined, and it was determined that they are not forgeries. But very little else could be learned. Then, something strange happened. Ten years had passed since the Neolithic mask had been discovered. Some guys were sneaking around the arid Judean desert. We don't know who they were, but we know they had bad intentions. These people were archaeologists' bane. They were looters. We are in a place named Nahal Hemar, a beautiful valley with high rocky cliffs on either side. The looters had discovered some artifacts in a cave. They were after items to be sold on the black market, and they didn't care about scientific investigations. As we previously stated, context is everything. Any useful information that an object might provide us is destroyed when it is removed from its context. The looters continued their criminal scheme for 3 years. But something completely unrelated to archaeology had just occurred. During the 6 Days War of 1967, the Israeli army had taken control of a vast area, including the Sinai Peninsula. A new war started only 6 years later. This time, the Egyptian army had a tactical success when it crossed the heavily fortified Suez Canal. This showed that Egypt was able to retake the Sinai. The war broke a years-long stalemate. At the country retreat of Camp David, American President Jimmy Carter was able to persuade the governments of Israel and Egypt to hold direct negotiations. A deal was made. It was the first time an Arab country signed a peace treaty with Israel. This required the transfer of Israeli military units from the Sinai Peninsula to the Judean desert. The archaeologists were concerned about the development of new military bases in this area. They feared that priceless treasures might be lost. So teams were dispatched everywhere. They carefully surveyed the region. In one of such expeditions, the looted cave was found. Welcome back to the cave of Nahal Hemar. This time, formal digging will take place here. The cave is not very big, even though it is only 8 square meters. This modest location will soon become very significant. The archaeologists got to work conducting careful research. Dirt, sand, and other debris were removed with trowels and brushes. In the end, they discovered one of the largest Neolithic treasure troves ever. The hoard was truly exceptional. Archaeologists found fragments of the oldest sickle ever discovered, very well preserved woven textiles, some elegant flint blades, a bunch of plaster figurines and beads, some skulls decorated with glue, and fragments of a stone mask. Finally, after years, a Neolithic mask had been discovered in its archaeological context. Okay, a lot to unpack here. The Nahal Hemar's treasure trove is not well known, but it should not be overlooked. Plaster figurines and beads are very interesting. According to archaeologists, this is the first time humans had complete control and understanding of a chemical reaction. So the people who left these items in the cave were quite advanced technology-wise. The sickle reveals an important detail. The mask must be associated with early farmers. Remember, we're talking about the Neolithic era. This is when humans began to settle and farm. However, it was a slow process rather than a quick one. Some tribes adopted agriculture, while others continued to hunt and gather. Finally, there are the skulls. The deceased person's hair was recreated by using glue mixed with some plant material. It sounds like a strange ritual. Why were they doing that? We have a lot of pieces of evidence scattered around, but we need to find a way to tie them all together. We can find some help in the city of Jericho, 25 kilometers north of Jerusalem. In Jericho, Neolithic people buried their ancestors under their homes. But occasionally, they removed and plastered the heads in order to preserve them. Archaeologists believe that this was a cult of the ancestors. What are the glue-coated skulls, the Nahal Hemar Cave, and the Neolithic masks all about? All of the objects have undergone careful examination, and they all have a lot to say. Let's go back in time and take a close look. Welcome to this early farming village. All of the people are in the fields because it is harvest time. A woman can be seen running along the path. She's shouting something that attracts everyone's attention. The elder just died! The elder just died! Everyone's faces were covered in horror and fear. The elder was more than just the leader. He also settled disputes, motivated people, and administered justice. This gloomy news meant trouble. The elder's body was buried near the village. 1 year later, the ritual could begin. His remains were unburied with care. Night crept in slowly. The moon was high in the sky. The strongest members of the community took a wooden stretcher and they carried the elder's body away. Led by a priest, they journeyed toward the nearby Great Valley. They eventually arrived at the holy cave as the sun was rising. The body was gently placed on the cave floor so that it could join his ancestors. They too had been buried there. The priest used the sacred flint knives to dismember the elder's body. Then the knives were ritually purified on a small fire. The priest took some liquid glue from a pot and carefully smeared it on the elder's skull, recreating his hair and making him alive once again. In the cave, there were many other skulls too. They were all once relatives in the elder's family. They all belonged to a long line of leaders. Finally, the elder's skull was covered with a painted stone mask. Thus, the mask took the place of his face. The small group went back home that night. they all wore stone masks. The message was crystal clear. Our ancestors walk among us. Just consider how old their lineage is. How dare do you claim that the farmland is not ours? We have owned this land since time immemorial. In an era where writing and laws had not been invented yet, the cult of the ancestors was the mark of ownership toward the land where people were just starting to settle. The stone masks were a complete enigma, but with small fragments of evidence, we can now have a better understanding of the past. So, you see, in archaeology, context is all.